This idea that Western powers can still lecture us,
talk down at us, disrespect us.
Exactly.
You know, Chaka, anytime we discuss something, I'm just so like, yes, we should decolonize ourselves. It's this easy. We should just do this. You just come up with a whole other side and say, it's not that easy. Because...
Do you know who the political mentor of Julius Malema is?
Don't tell me Raila Odinga.
No.
Okay, who?
Winnie Mandela. If you cannot safeguard the rights of an Agatha and safeguard the rights of a Boniface Mwangi, how can you safeguard the rights of business people, even who are coming across to do trade and to expand our economies?
That's true.
We can't speak of even an African continental free trade area if we can't secure an East African community.
Yeah. Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. Here, we unpack the complexities of people, policy, and power. I'm your host, Diana Ngao,
aka Madam Speaker, and I am Chaka,
aka the Bishop. Today, as we were discussing this episode, we made one realization, is that we're at war. And not the kind of war of guns and bullets and battlefields and a lot of army trucks. The war we're in is an information war. I mean, think about it. You wake up in the morning and there's so much information that you're bombarded with your phone. You know, you go online, there's so much information that you get. And it's really getting really hard to decipher what is truth, what is fact, and what is just sensationalism. More even from sensationalism, what has been manufactured to seem true. So we decided to come up with, to discuss this and dive into the kind of information war we currently are in, not just as humans having this humanly experience in the earth, but as Kenyans, as Africans, and more importantly, as citizens of the world. Sindio. And there's been so many things, by the way, that has been happening in this last few weeks, globally, regionally, continentally, that really made me specifically just stop and think like, hey, is that really what happened? Like, is that really how things played out? And I want to ask Chaka, what are some of the most significant things that have happened to you, or just things that made you just sit back and be like, hey, how did we get here?
You know, as you were talking about information wars, two things came to mind to begin with. One, our Lord Jesus Christ, speaking in the Gospels, said that in the last days there will be wars and rumors of war. And I think in the books of Timothy and Joel, it says, shall pour out my spirit and there shall be an increase in knowledge. I'm misquoting that. But those two things, one, an increase in knowledge, Bible definitely does make reference to that. We are living in an age of AI.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. And it's literally artificial intelligence. So that increase in knowledge. And this is right off the heels of the age of information, discussing InfoWars. And why that particular saying of Christ is interesting. Yes, he was referring to actual combat. Even the rumors of wars, because rumors spoken, and the thing about a rumor is information that's untrue, not necessarily true.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what we're discussing. And one of the things about this is because of the deluge of information, the sheer overflow of information, the flood of information, one of the effects is that we're living in a post-truth world.
Post-truth world?
Yes.
Were we ever in a truth era to begin with?
I think there was a time when,
things were
when you had one national broadcaster.
Okay.
Even though you had propaganda, it was easier to ascertain what was happening, or even it was easier to agree on what good values are.
Yeah. That's
Now,
true.
post-truth world means there's a lot of relativism.
Yeah.
It's about you have your truth, I have my truth.
Yeah.
That goes contrary to the very definition of what truth is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in light of that, I think seeing what has been happening between Kenya-Tanzania, seeing what has been happening over not just the last few weeks, but over several months, the immediate former deputy president and his political opponents, and who said what.
Did you know sasa wanamuita the people's deputy president?
Yes, sir.
You see? Information.
And talks of people abducting themselves. And these are national leaders we're talking about, legislators.
Yeah.
And government position coming out as even before investigations are over, people abducting themselves. Then I think internationally, though it happened a minute ago, that meeting between Trump and Ramaphosa in the Oval Office, thinking about that.
You know, I'm such a champion of Pan-Africanism. So when I understand the pressures that I was just thinking to myself, I could understand the pressures that Ramaphosa was under to have to make that visit to the White House. But after seeing how it played out, my heart just sank. It just made me feel this is how wanatubeba kama Africans. You know, and for our international audience, in case we do have international audience, what I mean is that, is this how they think about us? Or
carrying us pumpkin.
Yeah, carrying us pumpkin.
Wanatubeba malenge.
Thank you. Like, it just didn't sit well. Even if it wasn't about my country, it was about an African country, and it just didn't sit well with how everything was framed. It just, I don't know. It made me feel some type of way in terms of how is it that we're letting such a narrative fly, or rather get ahead, that now this is a narrative? Because I saw on CNN and other international broadcasters that, you know, it was such a debate that there's genocide happening in South Africa. White genocide, you know.
Reverse apartheid. And that wasn't CNN, that was the president of the free world of the US.
And you know, Chaka, I recently traveled to South Africa. And it's a great country, very beautiful, very lovely people. But for me, some of the things I saw is that they are still healing from apartheid. There's still so many things that are wrong because of the system of apartheid. And for a foreign nation to say that now it is the whites who are victims, I almost took up my fellow South Africa.
It wasn't just saying, actually it went beyond words.
Yeah, I did.
Because policy-wise, even before that visit, there have been tensions between South Africa and US.
Yeah.
And one of the policy positions that had been taken is, on the one hand, while Trump was closing the border for brown and black people, and, you know, even have people being sent away, on the other hand, he was accelerating the processing of refugee status for white South Africans.
Yes, 59 of them. Is it? I don't know whether it's 59 families or 59 of them actually did take up his offer to be settled back in the United States.
So it wasn't just a play on words, policy perspective. And at the same time, remember, he's also cutting aid. So advancing this narrative is quite dangerous. And it's one thing if we're talking about US foreign policy, which we're deciphering or analyzing. It's one thing if you're saying maybe it was Marco Rubio who said he was Secretary of State. But it's another thing if the president of the US is saying it. He's saying it in the Oval Office.
In front of, in media.
And with an African president seated
next to him. And by the way, Chaka, he not only said it, he also played a video that turned out to be fake, that's showing graves of white farmers. And now he's using that as his basis of his argument that there is genocide in South Africa. Yeah,
and that was actually a memorial, those white crosses for a farming couple.
Yeah.
And he also used another video from COVID, which was in Congo, not even in South Africa. And this is why I'm saying, remember, This is
Do you think that, sorry to cut you off, but do you think, I mean, America, comms wise, I mean, we are also comms practitioners, but comms wise, do you think it was deliberate or very deliberate?
Yeah, two things, and that's why I was going to say that this is really exhibits how we're in a post-truth, because remember, this Oval Office is the mecca of global politics, right? Anything that happens in the Oval Office with cameras there doesn't escape the glare of the international community.
Yeah.
And so to then have the president of the most powerful nation in the world using fake props, from blog posts that are fake to clips, montage that is fake.
Yeah.
I mean, if let's say CNN had done the same thing, there would have been, people would really have gone in against them.
Yeah.
So this, you can see that it's deliberate, because by the time you have that montage, you have the president having printouts.
Yeah.
He's not doing that for himself.
Yeah.
He was the night before.
Yeah.
It's a very concerted effort by
Yeah.
his team. So it's very deliberate. Secondly, in terms of maybe, and not to go too much into psychoanalysis, remember that the background of this president is reality TV. Remember The Apprentice.
And I'm going to sue you if I have to. Do you understand me? Yes, I hung up. You didn't get disconnected. I hung up.
Performance could have been better.
Could have been better.
It could have been a hell of a lot better. But look, I'm not a guy who's going to run around blaming people. So I'm going to take responsibility for that.
That's fine.
So if you want to fire me, go right ahead.
All right, Gene,
But I think
you're fired.
We're in full glare of cameras, and the pinnacle of the climax of The Apprentice was always, "You're fired."
Yeah.
So this was really
It was
The
performance,
Apprentice.
yeah.
It was before.
It was performance.
And he said the same thing when he was dressing down Zelensky, and he said, "This is going to be great television."
This is going to be great television, I will say that.
So he's playing
A
political
role.
theater
Yeah.
for his home base, because what we also know about politics is nothing unites a country faster than aggression or tensions with a foreign nation.
That's true. Yeah.
So for him, it's almost political tact for consolidating his base at home and showing strength in the face of other. And remember, we're living in a time where cancel culture is rife. The schisms with the other, them versus us, coming back. So I see a lot of political play there, and he didn't care how it would play out, that country. And indeed, policy-wise, one of the things you also see is that he's taking America back to an era of, well, right now he's calling it America Fast, but there was that era of America isolationism
Yeah.
leading up to World War II. And in fact, they had removed themselves from the international tensions until Japan decided to visit them at Pearl Harbor with salamu kutoka nyumbani. That's when they were roped into the war. But before that, there was such isolationism. Now you're seeing that they're moving away from their traditional allies. So that's to say that I do think it's deliberate. But the question is, some of the underlying assumptions there for us as Africans are part of what is problematic. Because this idea that Western powers can still lecture us,
Talk down at us. Disrespect us.
Exactly.
And maybe I was going to get into something, but let me just park that and answer that about Western powers talking down. I was reading in Honorable Martha Karrua's book, and she talks about the period of 2007, 2008, the National Accord and the negotiations. And she talks about how Condoleezza Rice they're in a room and President Kibaki is there. Martha is there as a lead negotiator. It's basically Kibaki's team, the negotiating team. And Condoleezza Rice is literally talking down at Mwai Kibaki. And Honorable Martha Karrua had to remind her that she's a representative of the head of state, but she's not Kibaki's equal. She cannot come and talk down. And even if it was president to president, I don't believe that's a tone that
Not
a
at
foreign
all.
nation should take.
Not
And
at all.
and just shows that time and time again, as African countries, we have allowed this to happen. We have allowed them to continue, even though we say we are sovereign. We have allowed them to talk down at us, to give us this whole I'm your policeman. Like, I have a very hot take in terms of what happened between Kenya and Tanzania. It's a very serious matter that happened, that foreign nationals can get tortured for no reason. And of course, it was a debate. There was so much uproar in Kenya, in Uganda, across African countries. And then we hear the US saying, yes, they come in and say, yes, there should be investigations as to why this happened. Well, I don't want to say that they should have remained quiet. I welcome that. But it also gives a sense of like, a sort of like a, how do I say? A
Big brother has spoken.
I know Big Brother has spoken, so you guys better get in order, you know? And I'm like, and where are the African countries? Where is the African Union? You know, we have to be our brother's keepers. That if I see another state doing, like, going off track, because we do have an African vision, right? Do we? Or maybe me as
Agenda 2063.
You know, we do have an African vision. And we've gone through such a dark past of colonialism, of imperialism, that we're still trying to unshackle ourselves off. But when we let foreign powers, and by the way, I'm not saying we cannot collaborate with them. We can collaborate with them, but collaboration is from a point of equal partnership. And it's not from a point of chaka, you know, talking down to someone. So I feel like in that essence, I would have wanted a voice from the AU. I'd have wanted, whether it was for condemning or cooling down the temperatures, whatever stand they would have taken. But I'd like to hear more African countries talking about the African problems and calling out those African problems. Because if Tanzania cannot progress, it will also draw Kenya down. You know, if the region can't progress, then what happens to also the SADC region? So I see that we've let this sort of
Toxic
relationship continue.
Two things I'd say. First of all, going to the AU, then briefly back to Ramaphosa and how it's relevant to what you've just said. I know we recently had a candidate, the AU, but you know, there's that saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Yeah.
The question would be, who are the biggest funders of the AU? Who also has the biggest shareholding in the African Development Bank? So on that note, I wouldn't bank.
You know, Chaka, anytime we discuss something, I'm just so like, yes, we should decolonize ourselves. It's this easy. We should just do this. You just come up with a whole other side and say, it's not that easy. Of course.
But I will say something about, and I say this with a sense of pride. Ramaphosa did play chess very well. And number one, there's been, like I mentioned, tensions between South Africa and the US for a while. For various reasons. One, the recent policy positions of the US, but also South Africa's place in BRICS.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And, you know, looking to consolidating that position. And of course, and one of the big policies, remember, of the BRICS countries is de-dollarization. It is a direct threat to the US with their dollar as a reserve currency. So from a policy perspective, but even in terms of diplomatic relations, there's been tensions brewing. And there are people in South Africa who took the view that Ramaphosa shouldn't have gone.
No.
But you see a level of intelligence, because when he went, he didn't go with a traditional political or government delegation.
That was what I was coming to. He
masterstroke of, you know, so you look at the South African flag, and this, in fact, was one of the key unification features of Mandela when he became president, is the Rainbow Nation. And this was a rainbow delegation.
Yeah, it was.
So he went with leaders of opposition. He went with sports celebrities, and particularly golfers. And remember, Trump loves golf.
Yeah.
So he also went with business leaders, including Boers, prominent white South African businessmen like Johan Rupert, who was actually one of the people who debunked Trump.
Yeah.
And saying,
Yes.
actually, the killings and crime happens to all South Africans. But so that's in terms of the composition of the delegation. But Zelensky, when he was being confronted and bullied, walked out. But Ramaphosa stayed cool
And
calm,
calm.
collected, like as cool as Kibaki.
Yes,
now
yes,
that you
yes.
mentioned him. And you mentioned how Martha was one of the lead negotiators. In the same way for Kibaki during 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
In the same way, you see Trump's political psyche and psychoanalysis, given his history of theater, television, The Apprentice. One thing to remember about Ramaphosa is
Yeah.
that he was the chief negotiator for President Nelson Mandela during the negotiations coming into the new South Africa post-apartheid.
Yeah.
Long time.
I didn't know this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was. He's been in that liberation struggle in a very big way.
Yeah.
So being a chief negotiator, Trump is always the art of the deal. He didn't know who he was dealing with.
Yep. Actually, I was pulling up my phone because in the period that was happening, South Africa have this brand South Africa social media. And one thing I wanted to give it to them is how they were able to frame the engagement of going to the White House and the key takeaways. So they even show South Africa in the US and you can see the delegation. You can see they've already told you this is a delegation. And then you go to South Africa at the White House at defining diplomatic dialogue. Here are the key takeaways. Trade and investment remain a cornerstone of the partnership, which is true. Like if you visit South Africa, a lot of the US stores are there and many other, I guess, trade relationships that they have. And then they say, this is where I was getting to, facts-led and values guide. And I think whoever framed this is very knew what we are saying today, that we are in an information war. And it's so important to find ways in how we can debunk this, let me say, subjective truths. These gray areas where people want to dance around these certain truths to frame a certain objective. And which was nice to see. And then the picture here is a picture of the South African, the white South African, I forget his name.
Johan Rupert.
Yeah, who was actually speaking to President Trump and telling him, actually, it's not white farmers are not being the one, it's not just white farmers, it's crime.
In South Africa,
it's high in South Africa. It's not just white farmers.
Yeah.
It was to me, I took that as I want to almost applaud them for just how they were able to frame it, because it felt like, even though the discussion felt a bit disrespectful, not just to South Africa, but to Africans, they came out very, and like Zelensky came out very poised and very on top of things and ensuring not to just go into a battle. Sometimes when you go back in a back and forth spat with someone on something so important, the information is lost in translation. But how they've carried on, or rather the delegation and whoever is doing their communications, is spot on.
And it's unfortunate because what was happening also was that very sensitive policy issues were being politicized.
Yeah.
And this is not just a South African issue, because we see Western interference in a lot of our policies to the detriment of Africans, because one of the issues there in terms of the white genocide was because of appropriation of land without compensation. Policy issues for years since 1994, where post the colonial legacy is, and this is all across Africa, is that they took away our land. And it was problematic now in a new and independent African states to deal with that land question, and it still plagues us to today.
I even want to say that, do you know, in Cape Town, there's an actual part of the city that's called Orania, and only whites can buy and live there.
What?
And they even have their own currency called the Ora, which they use to trade with. And the only people who are not white who can come in and out are the black people who work for this Orania. And I found it so, we couldn't even enter. We were tourists, but we couldn't even enter Orania. So I it piqued my interest. So I quickly Googled and I was like, okay, what the heck how is it that in this day and age and in this country that suffered under the apartheid rule, that this is happening?
The legacy lives on, yeah.
So I Googled and I checked and I saw a white man who was being interviewed and saying, you know what? Yes, we need Orania to remain alive because it is protecting our heritage. And I almost choked because
What if I told you there was something a little similar to that happening in Nanyuki, Kenya? Alama za dukodoko to be continued.
Yeah, but to me, so now I started talking to South Africans, or rather Black South Africans, and I was wondering, I'm like, how is your government allowing this to happen? Isn't this going back to the segregation that your forefathers faced, the blacks versus the whites and the coloreds? Like, it just seemed regressive. And I'm not this, I feel like sometimes in this post-truth world, just because I say something like this, then it feels like I'm hitting on. But the truth is,
Bonga, Toboa.
the truth is that South Africa is a country in Africa where it's predominantly black Africans. And when you look at the economic scale, when you see that the white South Africans, which make up almost 7% of the total population, are the ones who are more economic empowered compared to the Black South Africans.
It's interesting you say they comprise 7%, because what was interesting in terms of land policy under the apartheid regime is that the Africans were restricted to ownership of 7.5% of the land.
Hi, sasa. Unaona?
It's almost like the 80-20 rule. And even in terms of the economic legacy of colonialism, currently in South Africa, you have multiple economies in one economy. This is true of all African states, even Kenya. But one of the economies within the South African economy is the Boer economy. And there's a map of Africa, of actually the world, that was done showing where billion-dollar companies across the world. And you had over 1,000 in the US, you had a couple hundred in Europe, China. In Africa, you had 47. One was in Egypt, one was in Nigeria, 45 were in South Africa.
Ate?
The rest of the African continent was a desert in terms of billion-dollar companies. Now, and you can bet that those $45 billion companies as a direct result of the Boer economy, because they've organized them. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest investment vehicles, private investment firms in South Africa, is called 91 Century.
Yes, you told me about this.
Yes. Assets under management are bigger than the Kenyan economy, probably the East African economy. And the reason it's called 91 Century is that it was formed when Mandela was released from prison. Wakasema, guys, tujipange.
Let me tell you, we can't speak about what happened in White House without speaking to what sentiments led to Trump, or anyone who thought Trump was right, was true, what you're saying is true, without mentioning Julius Malema. Because, he's on podium saying shoot to kill, right? Kill the Boer, kill the farmer, right? And I liked, why I'm bringing that up is because I liked what Ramaphosa said. He said that South Africa is a multi-party democracy where parties are invited to participate in political happenings. However, the party in question, which was EFF, because I think they played a clip of Julius Malema saying that, and the party in question in that clip is just like, it's not in government. It's a minority party.
With no influence on government policy.
Exactly. And even the head of the Democratic Alliance, who is the Minister for Agriculture, was part of his delegation. And to me, I was like, I need to just clap for Ramaphosa for that, how he brilliantly answered that. And it made me start thinking about the EFF, because here in Kenya or parts outside South Africa, see EFF as this strong political party. You know, they are in red, they are bold, they say the most absurd things, although some of them ring true. So when you think about all the land injustices that people are still undergoing in South Africa, and EFF's strong call of shoot to kill or whatever that song is about, it makes you want to wonder why they haven't captured power yet. Wait. Before we continue, I have a question for you who's watching. Why haven't you subscribed to our podcast? This is a podcast for everything politics and governance that concerns you. So hit the subscribe button. You can also hit the notification bell of our YouTube channel so that you never miss an episode. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, and we're on Apple Podcasts. You can find this podcast anywhere you want. And follow us on social media. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter. It doesn't cost you anything. It will take literally a minute. Make sure you also share this video because hii si kitu ya kuwatch peke yako. Share it on your WhatsApp groups and let's stay connected. Haya sasa, let's go on.
Two things. One, on what Malema was saying, it's another case of excellent misinformation because that is coming from actually a liberation political song. Yeah. So it's very easy to take out of context because another person who has been singing that song is Jacob Zuma with his Umkhonto Wesizwe. You know, that spear of the nation.
Yeah.
So he still has that. So it's very easy to take it out of context. But you see, EFF... Well, I like the name of the party because actually that is the liberation struggle that Africa is going through right now and should be, if people are not aware, is economic liberation. But secondly, there's as it is, the Democratic Alliance to even have a coalition, ANC has taken
time.
Years.
Yep.
Part of what has happened in South Africa is that the ANC has retained a very strong hold on government and politics.
And mainly because it was also a key figure in their liberation struggle.
Yes.
So I'm sure people really do hold that ANC dear.
Yeah, and EFF is the same way right now. ODM is KANU, UDA is KANU. You know,
they just split up.
Yeah, they're basically offsprings of the ANC. And it's not just EFF. You also have Umkhonto Wesizwe.
Yeah.
They're all, DA is slightly separate because they're more leaning towards... but those three, Umkhonto Wesizwe, EFF, and ANC, and a few others, are all banking on that legacy of the ANC and the liberation struggle. So I think it's not very easy to unseat but it's been corroding with every successive election. ANC has been losing its grip, and that's why right now they're even in a coalition with the DA.
I learned something when I was down there, is that two things, is that I was fortunate to visit Robben Island, and the people who are touring, who to give the tour in Robben Island were actually, some of them are actually the prisoners, the political prisoners on Robben Island with Nelson Mandela. And there's something that he said many things in terms of even that they even live with the, they even live with the guards. But one thing that he said that to me, I was like, what? And he's like, yes, and you're looking at the last generation of political prisoners. After me, there's no one else. Because when he was caught, he was 18 years. So it's like, yeah, after this cohort of us, you will be hearing stories from other people who are learning, who have learned and had and not actually lived this experience. And it made me start thinking, and I'm like, maybe that's why also ANC's popularity is shrinking throughout the years. Of course, there are other issues that they can be accused of, but I think also it's just that the memory and the is slowly fading away in terms of what ANC stood for then and what it stood for now. And the new generation may not have that emotional tie to the ANC and would be open to hear the DA, which I also learned, this is the second thing I was saying, majority of the members of the DA are black. like, yes, they have a big majority that is white, but because of the population disparities between whites and blacks in South Africa, they have more black people now actually standing with under the Democratic Alliance. That shows such a interesting shift of politics. So to me, I'm seeing it more of like times are changing, and the younger generation may not have that much of an emotional tie to the liberation struggle. And ANC, I mean, not ANC, EFF seems me be like, like currently we have one term. And one term is exciting. And, EFF also says some exciting things, and they go viral, and their theatrics in parliament. But that's not enough to govern.
Can I share a fun fact?
Yeah.
Do you know who the political mentor of Julius Malema is?
Don't tell me Raila Odinga.
No.
Okay. Who?
Winnie Mandela.
Who?
Alikuwa mwanafunzi wake. So speaking of memories and the evolution of where we're coming from as Africa, you mentioned something about what was happening in Tanzania.
Yeah.
Between Tanzania and Kenya with the arrest of the activists, and now this diplomatic tiff that had our national prayer breakfast having Kenyan and Tanzanian MPs singing together off key.
Off key. That's a key point. Off key.
Pun intended.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, one of the things we've been discussing on this platform is how there's a generation, or many take for granted, the political awareness of the emerging generation and the emerging crop of voters.
Yes.
Who may not recall things that feel as recent as 2007, 2008, or even the referendum for a new constitution. For some people, it feels like yesterday, but there's a generation where it's history.
It's so removed, yeah.
And what I find interesting, and the point I want to try and bring about, is how more things change, the more they stay the same. Because what's interesting about Kenya and Tanzania relations, not so much with Uganda, but even there you've had some interesting developments over the years, is that there's always been this sort of Cold War on and off between Kenya and Tanzania. And it started as early as Julius Nyerere saying, if you want to see skyscrapers, go to Nairobi. You will see them there. And he was saying it was, he also famously said that Kenya is a man-eat-man society.
Yeah.
Because of our capitalist...
capitalist nature.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and they were socialist. And then Jonjo said that Tanzania is a man-eateth canine society. And it's interesting right now when you hear President Samia Suluhu say that Kenyans are interfering in their internal affairs. And not so long ago, you had borders being closed during COVID. But even more prominently, when the EAC initially collapsed in 1977, and it was, quite huge. That time, moving towards Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
We even had a common airline, the East African Airlines.
I know it. Yeah.
In 1977, it collapses, and the entire border was closed, and things remained tense for almost a decade. So now, with the thawing of those tensions and the EAC being reestablished closer to 2000, and now seeing what's happening between Kenya and Tanzania, where Tanzanian politicians are now saying, and we can see the recordings.
Yeah. I'm like, those words should not come from a legislator. And I just want to take you back in what President Suluhu said, is that Kenyan activists are coming to interfere with the internal affairs. And I feel like it is part of that information war, because she was cleverly trying to make it look like an invasion, and yet it is something that has been practiced over time. Julius Nyerere also did the same. He did go and visit or oversee, what were they going to do? To observe cases of their political peers across Africa. I can't remember who. But this activists or Kenyans or Ugandans or East African citizens who were going to Tanzania were not going to interrupt. They were not going to stage a protest. They were going in to show solidarity for one of their, I could say, opposition leader. And he's not just an opposition leader, he's also quite a prolific lawyer and author, to come and show solidarity for a serious case in which, over treason case. It is not uncommon for these things to happen, for people to want to come and observe such a high stakes case. So when now she comes and frames it at, oh, these people were coming to ban our country the way they've banned Kenya. First of all, Kenya has not banned, right? We have such robust democratic rights and expressions that we're able to show compared to our counterparts in Uganda and Tanzania, Kenya has such robust discussions and democratics at play, although that is also kind of shrinking. But now for her to come and now frame it at these guys are invaders. Like, no, this is an information war. And when you look at it also, this is not the first time president has actually called activists anarchists. This is not the first time. President William Ruto has said the same thing. President Museveni has said the same thing.
And now that you mention them, Kenya has also had interference in recent times.
Yes.
Because if you remember, during Gen Z protests, we also imported foreign talent.
On our streets. Yes.
Yeah.
We had foreign... Now we can't even say, because we don't know whether it was...
It's foreign talent.
Yeah,
and,
East Africa foreign talent.
So tunafanya two exchange.
Yeah, but it's in such a retrogressive manner, and it doesn't respect the treaties that we've signed as countries. And by the way, also, I was wondering, the way the Tanzanians were coming at us, I'm like, is this how much they hate us?
Well,
like,
yeah, it's part of that, tension that's there. Even because famously it said that Tanzanians are skeptical towards Kenyans, especially in terms of business.
Yeah.
That we're very quick-witted. But, I think I'll go back to some of the giants of human rights and political consciousness and why it is right for Africans to visit other African states and agitate for human rights. Martin Luther King famously said that a threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Absolutely. And what's happening across borders, what's happening to also another opposition leader in Uganda, Kizza Besigye, who's also on trial for treason. I hope President Ruto is not trying to get any ideas, because...
I think he used that word last year.
Oh, yeah. He calls the Gen Zs... It's just that the Gen Zs is not one person, but he calls them... treasonous
that's
criminals.
why they're faceless, leaderless.
Yeah. Otherwise, we would have a treason case on our hands. But yeah, I just see that the spirit and letter of the EAC treaty is showing up in a different manner, where our heads of states are collaborating, but on a retrogressive manner, in an oppressive manner, and which is raising tensions among us as citizens of East Africa, where Tanzanians would speak the way they speak. They're speaking right now about Kenyans and so far, and what all the discourse that we've seen online, down to even the members of parliament having such, I don't even know how long their session was, but just to discuss an opposition leader like Martha Karua and other people who were coming down. It's just, I keep wondering, I'm like, Sasa, where do we go from here?
It's interesting, the EAC is headquartered there.
And by the way,
ironically.
And President William Ruto is the chair of the EAC. So opposition leader gets abducted in Kenya, and he's the chair. They never talked about it.
I would have wanted to hear some comments from our Kenyan leaders who are representing us at the East African Legislative Assembly.
We even forget that they're there. They're so silent. What exactly is the role of the East African Legislative?
Yeah, especially our Kenyans.
Wow.
Touching on Kenya and the tensions, just as a fun fact, now that we're talking about that, did you know today in trivia that at one point in time, Idi Amin was invading Kenya.
Oh, really?
Yes, and because he was claiming that all the land, wachana na Migingo, that small island, he was saying all the land up to and including Naivasha
Yeah.
belonged to Uganda. Yeah.
Up till Naivasha.
Yes, he was coming to claim it. And in fact, Nyerere and Kenyatta had to stand together.
They collaborated.
Yeah, but it was proper. He was coming to invade, but he was put in check.
I think there's so much more to think about in regards to East Africa with what has been happening in the most recent past, not just the most recent thing with the unfortunate incident. It's not even an incident, it's an atrocity towards Boniface and Agatha. It's just, we need to really think around what these things are forcing our countries to be like. And also think about the grander vision of the EAC as a trading bloc, I know, as strategic partners, because we're next to the Indian Ocean. What does it mean for us? Because, the thing of being called head of state, it's very transient. So we don't want to burn this bridge of EAC or make tensions, because 2027 comes along and we could have a new head of state, and now we are starting from 1977 or whatever, when EACC fell apart.
You raise a very interesting point, and I'll just blaze through a brief analysis in terms of EAC, because you have various levels of cooperation between states regionally. You have common market, free trade area, economic union, and the ultimate one is a political union, where you'd have the East African countries as federal states under one now unified country. And some of the things we're seeing may look like political issues of the day that are like passing clouds, but they're a threat precisely because one of the pillars of that regional integration is free movement of goods and services.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of economics, you can't enjoy economic progress without the safeguarding of human and property rights.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can't have that economic, it's a threat to any economy. Once you're not able to safeguard property rights and human rights, then you're looking at collapse and failure, even state failure, because that is part of the donation of power to the state. And so even in a regional sense, that's why we give that monopoly to the state, monopoly over the instruments of violence. So if you have a situation where you have Kenyan citizens being abducted or a Ugandan citizen being violated in a neighboring country for exercising what are not just, because remember, the thing about human rights is that they're not unique or monopolistic to our country. They're put across the board.
Yeah.
That's why you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which then cascades into our constitutions.
Yeah.
So it should not be an affront that somebody from Uganda is going to agitate for the rights of
someone in
Tanzania. But more importantly, part of the implication is that if you cannot safeguard the rights of an Agatha and safeguard the rights of a Boniface Mwangi, how can you safeguard the rights of business people, even who are coming across to do trade and to expand our economies?
That's true.
So it's a threat to that effort at integration. We can't speak of even an African continental free trade area if we can't secure an East African community.
Yeah. Wow. I like
End
that.
of monologue.
No, you raised such a powerful point in terms of the basis of the human's rights, and how human rights then now go into all these other treaties and ways in which the states relate with each other. But I think we've come to the end of episode. Tuambie moja mbili.
I think one of the things we've said about Politically Connected from the very beginning is that our mandate, as we see it, is to raise the political consciousness of the African continent. And so I think we can expect that increasingly we will foray into African countries, neighboring African countries, near and far, and explore the issues there.
Yeah.
Because as famous former insider of UDA likes to say, We are Africa, and Africa is our business.
I hope our audience knows who he's talking about. Yeah, I think you put it really well that, yeah, indeed, we want to raise the political consciousness of our continent. And more specifically to this episode, I just would like to urge our audience is that indeed, we are in an information war. Every single day, someone is trying to manipulate a certain narrative to fit a certain objective. And the onus is on you because no one is, the powers that may be that should protect us from such manipulation are not going to do that because they are the ones engaged in this manipulation. So the onus is on you to do the best you can to find out from what is definitely fake and what is true. There's no gray area in between. Because the moment we entertain the gray area is the moment we also entertain the lie. And for us to progress as a continent, because for us here, we are Kenyans and we are Africans, for us to progress as a continent is that we must accept some painful truths to move forward. So yeah, that's the end of our episode. If you haven't already, my goodness, hata sijui unafanya nini, just pause here right now and click the subscribe button so that you can never miss an episode of Politically Connected. Kabisa, promise. Ni free. 100% free. And it's the only thing we ask of you, by the way. Just subscribe to our podcast. And you can find us on all social media platforms. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and X as well. And for Chaka and I, we're also on those social media platforms. So for either of the hosts, feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
Until next time, see you soon on a screen near you.